Hi there, I'm Chief Meteorologist Don Schwenneker. Welcome to the First Alert Winter Weather Roundtable, where we answer your questions. Joining me today, meteorologist Kwelyn, meteorologist Robert Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Guys, thanks for stopping by.
Of course.
All right, we've got questions from viewers. They were submitted via social media. Let's get straight to them. These are all questions dealing with things that we deal with here in the Carolinas in the wintertime. The first question: can we see winter tornadoes, and what's the worst tornado North Carolina has ever seen? Who wants it?
Yeah, so we certainly can get tornadoes in the winter. I mean, on December 10th, it was you and I tracking that EF1 tornado. Of course, that's officially fall, not officially winter at that point, but we can get tornadoes in January, February. I remember right before I moved here in 2020, you and Steve Stewart were on the air tracking several tornado warnings. So it certainly is possible. You don't want to let your guard down during any part of the year, because we can get tornadoes at any time of the year.
Yeah, winter is essentially a second severe weather season. Yeah. So you have that clash of the air masses. In some particular instances, we had the really warm air clashing with really cold air with the cold front. I also did some research looking back to 1958 to 1998. We actually had 12 F4 tornadoes in the state. But F4, as we know, is the Fujita scale, and that was based off of sustained wind gusts of 210 miles per hour for a small time. And we know that, of course, the scale has changed since 2007. Now the enhanced Fujita scale is what we use, and we like that scale better because it gives the National Weather Service a chance to go out, survey damage, and that, of course, gives us a better indication as to what kind of damage and how strong that tornado was. So we know we've seen at least F4s here across the state.
And I am so thankful you looked that up, because a good meteorologist doesn't always know the answer to every question, but they know where to find the answer to the questions.
Yeah,
so thank you. Yeah, some of those historical ones can kind of get lost over the years, especially if they happen in the 50s and 60s. Second question, I think this kind of relates to the tornado question, because sometimes we can see them. Can we see a tropical storm late in the year?
Of course. For example, 2023, we had a subtropical system in January. And so it wasn't named because it never really evolved into a full tropical system, but that was the case. And so we know that can happen during the winter months.
Yeah, and what's really more rare, I'd say, is to have a tropical system during this time of the year, but certainly it is possible. It can happen, so you never want to let your guard down. That's why you want to get the latest forecast with us so we can give you that first alert.
And speaking of first alert, we have a new tool to help detect when those storms are firing. That's the ABC11 First Alert Doppler Net. If you haven't seen us talking about it, we now have the largest network of live Doppler radars available in central North Carolina. And this is really an amazing tool for us, because the old way the radar worked is with the National Weather Service. They have a great radar system. They really do. It doesn't take anything away from it. But as it scans, it can take up to 6 minutes to send that data from the National Weather Service to us here at the station and to anybody who's using it on their phones. Live Doppler Net is instantaneous.
Yeah.
That's right. And the resolution is so much higher, too. So we were on the air December 10th tracking what ended up being an EF1 tornado. And then we were able to see, with the exclusive ABC11 First Alert Doppler Net, faster scans. We get the information sooner, so then we're able to better detect and more easily detect where an area of rotation is. And that really helps us when we need critical information.
Absolutely. And by the way, it also does a great job of showing us the difference between raindrops and snowflakes.
Oh, yeah.
And we will talk more about winter weather coming up as we head to break. One of the questions was, what is the coldest temperature ever recorded in our area? Might be a little colder than you think. Back in 1985. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us for this First Alert Weather Roundtable on winter weather. We are answering your questions. We want to make this as interactive as we can, so we thank you for all the questions that were submitted online. Our next question, this is one we get a lot this time of year, and it is, what is the difference between snow, sleet, freezing rain, or just plain old rain? Kwelyn?
It's all about that vertical temperature profile, the temperature in the atmosphere from the surface all the way up to where we can't see. And we're talking about where ice crystals form. When you have the temperature that stays below freezing all the way through pretty much the atmospheric column, snowfall is likely. When you see the temperature slowly rising a bit, starting off as frozen precip and then melting just a bit, and then freezing again at the surface, that's sleet. And then when you see the temperature profile of starting off above freezing and then reaching freezing or below at the surface, freezing rainfall. And of course, above freezing, we get rainfall all the way down. But what people should know is that that rain actually starts off as snow.
Yes.
And then it
Always.
falls as rain.
This time of year, it is ice in the upper part of the atmosphere. It's extremely cold in the upper atmosphere. So no matter what we see down here at the surface, it always starts as snow in the wintertime. Robert, you want to comment on grapple? That's the other one. Grapple is another type of frozen precipitation where it balls up and it can be made from sleet, and it's a whole different thing. How much rain, or does rain work to cool the surface before it starts to snow?
Yeah, so it certainly can make a difference. We call that evaporational cooling. So we can have rain that comes down, and then that can certainly cool the column if it rains hard enough. But something that's usually more of a struggle for us when we're forecasting is maybe not so much that part of the atmosphere, but really is the cold air already in place. It's hard to have a system where it's already raining, and then typically what happens is the cold air tries to catch up with the rain. If that's occurring, it's really hard to get accumulating snowfall. So can rain cool the column in the atmosphere to allow us to get some snow? Yes, that can happen, and that has happened here before, but really the difficulty is having the cold air already in place so that way we can get accumulating snowfall.
Yeah, and I think it's important for our audience to know that we have a bunch of tools that are available to us. One of them are actually surface temperatures that come to us from the state of North Carolina. They have sensors across the state that tell what the individual ground temperature is, and that's important because a lot of times we'll know, even if it's going to snow, whether it's going to be a big accumulation or not based on the ground temperatures. If ground temperatures are really warm and we're seeing snow and it hits it, it's going to melt, and it's going to take a while to bring that ground temperature down. So that can really impact our accumulations as well. We may see 3, 4, 5 inches of snow, but on the ground you get a ½ inch of snow because the ground was so warm that all of it melted before it finally got here. I think this is an interesting question. I'm going to change it around a little bit. The question originally said, why is it common for wintry weather to begin or end with icy conditions? But I think a better question is, why do we see ice in the Carolinas? And that has to do with where we are.
Yeah, I mean, we're right next to the ocean. So you were talking about this earlier in regard to snow, rain, freezing rain, sleet, and we can get what's called a warm nose that comes in right off the ocean, so we can get a warmer column of air that comes in as the system is coming in, especially from the south. It's pulling up warm air with it. So that's why we can have icy conditions here. It could be at the beginning of a storm, the end of a storm, or even during the middle of a storm, and it really depends upon not just the storm itself, but where you're living, whether it's in Roxborough versus Fayetteville. That makes a difference too.
Yeah, I really believe ice is the most devastating type of precip to have too, because what people don't understand is that you can't drive on ice. Your car doesn't behave the same way. You can't brake on ice. Your car's going to slide. So in my opinion, that's the most dangerous type of precip to have.
Not to mention ice is really heavy, and we do see power outages as it brings down those power lines too. All right, as we head to break, this question asked to us, what is our snowiest month on record? We'll show it to you as we head to break, and we'll be right back.
Let's go a little bit deeper of a dive here into the different types of precipitation that we do get in the wintertime and how they actually happen. First and foremost, honestly, in our world, the easiest is if the entire column is below freezing, it's all snow. And that's fairly easy. If we know that, the only challenge then is how much are we going to get? And the temperature really depends on how much snow we're going to get, believe it or not. If you had the same moisture content and it was 32 degrees, we might get like 3 inches. But if it's colder, that's going to be more. And the reason is pretty simple when you think about it. So it's a milder snow, it's going to be wetter flakes, and that's going to compress, right? But if it's a really cold snow, it's more fluffy, and that stacks more. So our job is to find out what's the snow ratio, right? So on average, say 10 to 1. 10 to 1 meaning for every 1 inch equivalent water content would be 10 inches of snow. So a really wet snow could be a 7 to 1 ratio. A really, really cold event could be like a 12 or 15 to 1 ratio. That's really all we have to figure out. And then we just see how much snow that we do get. So snow is the easy one. Another easy one, well, when it's all above freezing from 15,000 feet to the surface, that's just going to be a cold rain then. The challenge is in the middle, when we have warmer air aloft coming in, but the surface is still freezing. So the snow comes down, turns into rain, and it melts, and then it goes back into a really cold layer, and then it freezes once it hits the ground. That's freezing rain. We don't like that one at all. And then when you have the same scenario happen, where we have snow turn into rain, but it has a deeper column of cold freezing air, it has time to turn into a little pellet. We call that sleet. You can hear it when it hits the ground. It can bounce off your sleeve and things of that nature. And what's interesting, the difference between sleet and snow, by the way, the difference is interesting too, because if you have the exact same moisture content between snow and sleet, let's say northern Wake County was an all-snow event, you get 8 inches. But just miles away, people think, oh, we missed out on the snow. Well, no, not really. It just transitioned over to sleet, and sleet compacts and compresses where snow is going to stack. So the same moisture content can look completely different depending on where you are. And the challenge in our world is finding out where that sleet line is going to set up.
Welcome back to your First Alert Winter Weather Roundtable. I'm Chief Meteorologist Don Schwenneker, along with Kwelyn Murphy and Robert Johnson. We are answering your questions you submitted to us via social media, all our channels. We collected all the questions. Let's get back to those questions. The next one asks about El Nino. How does El Nino affect us in the winter?
Yeah, it usually results in wetter than average conditions for the area, but also warmer than average conditions, which is why we're saying the chance for snowfall this season is lower than, seasons where we're not in an El Nino, but it's not impossible. It's all about the atmospheric pattern that the atmosphere takes on. So that's something we'll be monitoring, of course, case by case.
Yeah, you used a key word there, chances, because there's no guarantee that we're going to get a lot of snow or even a lot of rain, but the chances do go up. We do expect to have a wetter than average winter. Traditionally, more rainfall in this kind of a setup.
And El Nino, by the way, the warmer temperatures in the waters off the coast of Central America usually happens around Christmas. In the Spanish-speaking countries, El Nino stands for the Christ child. That's how it got its name. The opposite is La Niña, and La Niña is when the water is colder than average. And when we see those winters, usually we're drier than normal. And the past couple of winters have been La Niña, and our snow totals have been, I don't know if that's a meteorological term, but that's what we're going with today.
Works.
All right, this next question is I think this is interesting for all of us because we all have different journeys getting here. Somebody writes, if your child's in junior high or high school and wants to become a meteorologist, what's the best way to set them up for success? And what colleges? We'll get to those in a moment because I know what Robert's going to say.
Well,
But first, so if someone's in middle school or high school, I did not originally want to become a meteorologist. I originally wanted to work in broadcasting. I wasn't sure what I did. And I actually had to go back to college to get my meteorology certification. But Robert, you wanted to be one for a long time.
From birth.
Right? He was born to be a meteorologist. Talk a little bit about those kids pursuing it in school. What should they be focused on?
Yeah, so I did go to Penn State to become a meteorologist, and when I was growing up, I didn't realize that there were so many people that were as young as me in elementary school, junior high, and high school that also had a love and a passion for the weather. So growing up in Philly, born and raised, I loved snowstorms, hurricanes, and I loved watching the TV meteorologists, how they explain things really well that are actually quite complicated. And something that really helped me to forge my path was getting to learn from other meteorologists, and they coached me, they mentored me. So like with anything in life, find some good mentors, and they can really help to show you the way.
Yeah, then find a school where atmospheric sciences is really the offering. That's what you're looking for. Yeah. And there are lots of great four-year universities and also certification programs too. But I, like Don, didn't intend to be a meteorologist initially. I went back to school for my meteorology certification as well. So everybody's journey is different. But the point is, if your child knows what they want to do, then of course, like Robert said, forge that path and help them get there. There are lots of people out there waiting to help them make their dreams come true.
Yeah, and there are lots of colleges around the country with great meteorology programs. Of course, Penn State. We hear about that one a lot.
What can I say?
Mississippi State? Shout out.
Mississippi State is where we went. Locally, we've got NC State has a great program. So does the University of North Carolina at Asheville. Pretty much any university that has big thunderstorms in a state that has thunderstorms or tornadoes, Florida State,
Hurricanes.
Oklahoma, Kansas, Iowa State, they all have meteorology programs. So science, math, very important. Computers, very important. And no matter what your child wants to be when they grow up, I would say the last thing you want to point them toward is a speaking class or a speech class. It can be intimidating to speak, but I meet these incredible scientists who have a hard time sometimes communicating their ideas. So no matter what they want to be, if they can learn to communicate those ideas, I think that helps too. All right, we're going to head to break one more time. This was a question I get asked every time it thunders. Is it true that it will snow 10 days after a thunderstorm in the winter? Believe it or not, there's a little bit of truth to that. As we head to break, we show you the numbers. My wife and I went through over 100,000 different data points to figure this out, but it can happen. We'll show you those numbers. We'll be right back.
Ice, freezing rain, that's the worst. That's the most dangerous. That can cause significant amount of problems. And we really have to have the exact right setup for that. Let me explain. So anytime we have winter precipitation, if we have some warm air coming in off the ocean, when I say warm, I just mean above 32. I mean, literally 32.1 would do it. So as long as we're above freezing between 1,000 and say 5,000 feet, that'll start to melt the snow into rain. And then at the surface, if it's freezing, then it's going to refreeze as freezing rain. So that's how we're going to get some accumulating ice. But in order for that to happen, two things have to happen. One, if you do that, if say our air temperature is about 32 degrees and we start getting some accumulating ice, if we don't have this, a consistent supply of below freezing air being forced down here by a cold high pressure, that freezing rain is going to come to an end very quickly. Because what's interesting is anytime you go from a liquid to a solid, that releases what we call latent heat into the atmosphere. Every single raindrop's going to do it. So it doesn't take long before you go from 32 to 32.1. That's all you need to do, and ice accrual then stops. So either you need this constant reinforcing cold air coming in to replenish and offset the latent heat release, or the other thing is when the freezing rain event starts, say it's around 23, 24 degrees. So it'll take some time before that latent heat's going to get you past freezing, and in that time you can have some ice accrual. Now, what does ice do to us? It's not good. And most of our events are going to be a glaze to a quarter inch. And a quarter inch is pushing it. But if that happens, you get the power lines coated, trees coated as well. Branches, you're going to see them sagging down, and in some cases they'll break. So there will be some power outages. Not huge, but there should be some. The roads could be slick, but we're mainly talking elevated surfaces, bridges, overpasses, things like that. So let's go beyond that. Let's get up closer to a ½ inch of ice. This is significant. Tree limbs are going to sag. They're going to break for sure. Roads are going to be covered in ice. By the way, when you add about a ½ inch of ice, you're adding to a branch about 30 times its weight. It's insane how much weight it is. So these branches are going to break. Roads will be covered in ice, and widespread power outages could take a really long time to recover from that. The more typical type of ice that we get around here, honestly, is black ice. Right? We get some rain, or maybe get a little snow, and then we get the refreeze at night, and bridges and overpasses are the main areas. Other areas that get it are shady areas, too, of getting some black ice. But that happens much more than ice storms do. Matter of fact, the last time we had a major ice event, you have to go back more than 2 decades, back in 2002.
Welcome back. We're so happy you've spent some time with us here today with your First Alert Winter Weather Roundtable. We've got 2 more questions to round out our special talking with you folks from our viewers. The first one, how much cold weather does it take to help control bugs around here in the wintertime?
Yeah, that's a question that a lot of people ask because they're just over it, especially when it comes to mosquito season and other maybe rodents that are running around. The bugs don't actually get killed from the cold air, but they do become dormant and they take a time to become inactive. So that's a temperature that's based off of each insect or animal, and so they have that opportunity to be dormant. But then they do come back out, and it's still possible that even when they become dormant, they'll come back out for a small season, mosquitoes included. So you can still get mosquito bites in the wintertime.
Absolutely, and it may take out a few of them, but not all of them, so be ready. Last question. This one, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because I was asked this in several different ways. How or why do we see certain weather on one side of an interstate or a road versus the other side, specifically I-95 or US 1 is another one. And I'm going to go back a little bit to our ancestors and the folks who first set up in this area in North Carolina. When they set up those individual roads, they were usually set up along lines of easy transit. So if it was snowing in an area more, they'd go south of where that snow was, and that's where they would set up those first roads. And as we've evolved as a population, many of those roads have stayed the same. And so that's why if you look down east of I-95, they are far enough away from the mountains and close enough to the ocean that they get more of an ocean influence. Now, our individual ancestors didn't know that. They just knew that the weather was a little different here versus there. But where the roads are today actually can go back hundreds of years to where those lines were set up before. The further east you live in the viewing area, the more ocean influence you have. The further west you live in the viewing area, the more influence you have from the mountains. And as the air comes down the mountains, it can dry, it can warm. We see all kinds of effects with that. So where those roads are happen to be set up where the different weather happened, possibly hundreds of years ago. A little historic perspective for you on that. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Guys, any final thoughts?
Oh, you covered it.
Yeah, and just stay with us as the weather changes. Obviously, we made some initial predictions for the winter, but you want to keep checking back in with us so that way you're ready to go when prepared, and we'll give you your first alert.
And here's the nice thing about that first alert with this team of meteorologists. We all are very close to each other. We're texting back and forth even when we're not on TV. So if winter weather is headed our way, we're talking to each other. We will have team coverage, and we will get you to that safe spot and keep you safe through the winter storm. Stay safe out there. Take it easy. If the roads ice up, we'll be on TV telling you about it. Have a great day.